How did you almost pass away? Had friends over playing video games. A pipe burst and gas was pouring into the house, but we couldn't smell it downstairs. My dad noticed and got us all out of the house. Fire chief got there and took a reading, and the level was so high he forbade anyone from going in. He said, "It's a good thing no one rang the doorbell because they can cause a spark which would have ignited everything." We had pizza on the way. Delivery guy showed up 5 minutes after the fire department. Whew, glad the fire department didn't ring the bell too. Story 2. LMAO. Okay, so I was getting my teeth cleaned, right? And I got nitrous oxide because I have so many exposed roots. Well, my hygienist at the time was this lovely lady from Minnesota. Kind of flaky, but super sweet, talked about her family all the time. So I'm in the chair and she hooks up my mask and away we go. I actually fell asleep, except not so much. Turns out Barb had forgotten to turn the oxygen on and had been feeding me straight nitrous. She only noticed because I started gasping for air while unconscious. So that's how I almost passed away at the dentist. I never saw Barb again, but I tell ya, that was the best nap of my life. Story 3. In the 90s, when I was a little kid, my family was on vacation in the Caucasus and Civil War broke out. We were walking down on the road and I went too far ahead alone. Car stopped, window rolled down, and a machine gun muzzle pointed right at me. My mom ran ahead, grabbed me, and fell into the bush on the shoulder. The car went on. We were going into the mountains to a sanctuary. I don't entirely know how we got back home. Story 4. 16-year-old farm kid me, stepdad told me to go pick up a load of corn seed for planting. I'd gone with him many times before and drove the truck, full-ton, dually diesel, and hauled light stuff with it. Nobody told me how different it is to haul 10,000 pounds of seed on a big flatbed trailer on gravel. I had a lot of common sense and was driving slowly and carefully. Still, 10,000 plus pounds pushed me down a gravel hill, skidding, praying to God I stopped before the stop sign at the T intersection to a busy highway. I came to a grinding halt just as the front of the truck crossed the plane where the gravel turned to asphalt. A semi was coming from one direction and regular cars from the other. I shudder thinking about what if on that one. Story 5. Was backwoods camping in Yellowstone, and if I hadn't considered for 30 seconds if I really needed to get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I would have walked out of my tent head first into a brown bear, which I heard before leaving and found tracks of next to my tent in the morning. Spookiest moment of my life in hindsight. Story 6. In high school, I was late for class coming back from grabbing lunch. As I was speed walking from the car and also cramming a sandwich down my throat, I started choking halfway from the parking lot to the closest building. I dropped the sandwich and started running. I ran into the first building, which was the band building, and it was completely empty. Ran to the next building, and the first 2 classrooms were locked or empty. I finally made it back to the hallway, and I burst into a physics class where one of my good friends happened to be sitting in. I was purple and red and about to pass out. I pointed to my throat, and my buddy jumped over the table and immediately gave me the Heimlich. 5 pumps in, and it came out, probably 2+ minutes without breathing. Coincidentally, I recently helped him get a job at the company I work at, so I finally feel like I found a way to repay him, lol. Story 7. I'm actually coming up on the 3rd anniversary of the accident this Friday. I was on my way to work, just kinda cruising along in the far right lane with my cruise control on as I wasn't in a rush and was making good time. I'm not sure if anyone has ever been in a little fender bender and felt that tap, but I felt a little tap and I looked at my side view mirror only to see a massive 18-wheeler's bumper basically against the backside of my car by my driver's side tire. The next events are a big mystery to me, thanks TBI, but future crash reenactments basically show that he overtook my vehicle and merged on top of me, trapping me underneath his trailer. My steering wheel was snapped in two, my A pillar was all but disintegrated, and my B pillar was pushed halfway into my seat. I came to as someone was kicking in my passenger window. I was bent over the center console and couldn't sit up because of the truck trailer in my seat. EMS got me out and I was rushed to the hospital. I should have passed away. Not a single person who has seen my vehicle understands how I survived. Story 8. Me and my friend were on our way into the city. Her car hydroplaned and we flipped 6 times and hit a light pole. We were both fine, but her car was totaled. We were lucky to have people stop and help us when we landed upside down. I couldn't open my door, so I ended up having to be pulled out through the passenger window. As scary as it was, I was mostly angry because the paramedics were only there for 10 minutes at most, and all they did was check our pressure and heart rate and then went on their way. Story 9. First time was when I found myself driving on black ice. The suction from a tractor trailer passing by spun my car around, and I landed nose down in a snow-filled ditch, 5 feet from a bridge. Second time, got my brakes done on my car as part of regular maintenance. The next day, I was driving home from visiting my mother on a downhill slope that ended at a traffic light. Stepped on the brakes, nothing. Foot went right to the floor. I blew through that red light at that intersection, going 80 kilometers an hour. Apparently, they forgot to draw the lines. Third time, had a tumor growing in my colon. Showed symptoms of it for years, which my doctors poo-pooed as PMS. When you're a physically fit 30-ish young woman, stomach and back pain can only be lady stuff, right? Symptoms got worse and worse. The pain was unbearable. Finally, my stomach started to bloat so much that it looked 9 months pregnant. I went to my doctor in the ER during that week and each time was turned away. Finally, on my second visit to the ER, I told them that if I didn't get help, he was getting in my car and driving off the nearest high bridge I could find. They decided that I was maybe worth an exam and an x-ray. Turns out the tumor had grown so large I had a 100% bowel obstruction, and because of that, the food I had eaten was inside my body. Surgeon told me without intervention, I was at most 48 hours from passing away. The negligence of doctors over the years cost me several feet of colon, having to poop into a colostomy bag and ongoing medical issues. There have been other incidents, but not as close. I feel like a cat and I'm wondering what the next near misses will be before I run out of lives. Story 10. I was at a small music festival with some friends and my then girlfriend. We were all experiencing the effects of a substance, and it was her first time with things going well. A few hours in, someone handed me a vape pen. Naturally, I took a hit. Had never been a problem before, but apparently these individuals didn't properly source their product. I don't know what it was in that bootleg vape pen, but I quickly discovered I was wildly allergic to it. Suddenly, my ears became itchy, then my throat, and then my breathing became harder, rapidly progressing to very difficult. At this point, I croaked at my girlfriend that we should find some Benadryl. After 20 minutes of asking everyone we saw, the best we got was an unlabeled pill bottle that someone vaguely said, "I think the little ones are Benadryl." By now, I was wheezing and having trouble staying upright. We called 911 and 10 minutes later, a guy in a truck arrived, sent to inform us that an ambulance wouldn't be coming. We were in the middle of nowhere, Georgia, and literally everyone was under the influence. We asked if he could lead us to the nearest ER, and he reluctantly accepted. I think the fact that I was turning blue earned me some sympathy, so we found the least impaired person we could, and my girlfriend and I piled into their car. The guy in the truck took off, speeding down these dark, twisting country roads. We managed to get to the ER, where they administered some liquid Benadryl intravenously, and a few minutes later I could breathe again. Thank goodness, I was barely 26, and my parents' insurance still covered me. It wasn't the most scared I've ever been, but it was definitely the closest I've come to passing. Before we started asking for help, I considered just trying to sleep it off since the lack of oxygen was making me tired. It would have been a truly terrible way to end my girlfriend's first experience with that particular substance, waking up next to her departed boyfriend. Story 11. Most recently, getting pregnant. My baby was diagnosed with a congenital heart defect in utero, one that would likely be dangerous shortly after birth without intervention. A challenging fact that we learned during my pregnancy was that there are no pediatric cardiac surgeons in my state. I was perfectly healthy except for a lot of swelling. At 37 weeks, my husband and I drove 4 hours to the next state over to transfer my care for his birth and eventual surgery. I was incredibly unwell, and the trip took us 7 hours because we had to stop so frequently. I had a doctor's appointment the next morning, and my husband asked if I wanted to eat first, and I said no, I'd rather eat after. I live to regret those words because I was admitted directly from that doctor's appointment with HELP syndrome. I wasn't allowed to eat because I was being prepared for an emergency C-section. Story 12. Being born, the doctor decided to deliver me while my mom had only been in the second stage of labor for about 20 minutes, and I had barely descended. The forceps were placed incorrectly on my head, over my cheek, which left a scar. I was then pulled out for anywhere up to 17 minutes, though the exact time is uncertain because proper notes weren't kept. My shoulder got stuck, a condition known as shoulder dystocia, and my collarbone was harmed during the process of getting me out. I emerged bruised and blue and had to be resuscitated twice. I also had a hematoma on my head from the pressure of the forceps. My birth left me fully paralyzed in my left arm, and I had to undergo a 12-hour nerve graft surgery as a baby to regain some function. I am still permanently disabled and experience chronic pain around the clock. Yes, it was malpractice. Story 13. I was sprinting to catch the 6:22 a.m. metro train to work. It usually slows down, which would allow me to cross the tracks as it stopped. I guess that day, the train was delayed, and instead, it was an express train barreling down at top speed. I was running on the actual track for a few seconds and felt the heat of the lights on me. I leapt to the side as it whizzed by. I was okay until I saw the faces of those who witnessed it, and then my knees buckled and I almost retched. I haven't run for the train since. Story 14. Not me, but my husband. He woke up one night while I was at work, third shift, with heartburn. He tried to ignore it and just go back to sleep, but our son, 6 months old at the time, had been very fussy all night, which was unusual. He rolled over and just tried to keep quiet so the baby would soothe himself to sleep. About an hour before I was off, the baby suddenly started crying intensely. My husband got up, with the heartburn still bothering him, but when he picked up the baby, he felt his chest suddenly burst into agonizing pain. His mom came and got the baby, who quieted down all of a sudden and went back to being a happy baby. I arrived not even a minute later, and my husband was walking over to my car. His face turned white, then yellow, with every heartbeat. I grabbed him quickly and helped him into the passenger seat, then sped off to the hospital just down the road. As a thin, active man of 36, the triage nurse initially suggested it was probably a panic attack and asked if he was sure he wanted to be checked out. We were lucky that another nurse saw us looking so distressed and came over with an ultrasound, because my husband's pressure and everything else was reading normal. It turned out he had a 100% blockage of his LAD artery, also called a widowmaker. This type of heart attack has a 99% mortality rate because it's such a sudden event. He had undiagnosed diabetes, so it wasn't cholesterol, which is what they were looking for. It was calcium. He made it through. He's 44 now, and our son keeps us on our toes every day. Story 15. In March 2021, I started to feel like I had allergies, thinking, wow, there shouldn't be tree pollen out yet. A few days later, I tested positive for some virus. I isolated at home with what felt like a pretty bad cold. After about a week, it became hard to breathe, so my doctor sent me to the ER. I slowly hobbled in, weak and hunched over. When they took my vitals, my oxygen saturation was 79%. They rushed me up to the ICU. My wife wouldn't see me for another 23 days. After a week of progressively worsening on BiPAP in intensive care, I was medically sedated and paralyzed so I could be intubated and placed on a ventilator. It was all my local hospital could do in hopes that I would recover. After a few weeks on the ventilator, my lungs started showing massive scarring. The local hospital told my wife she needed to either get me to a transplant hospital or figure out end-of-life plans. I was not going to survive with my damaged lungs. My wife filed paperwork with several transplant hospitals, but no one had a bed available. The virus was overwhelming hospitals everywhere, especially cardiovascular ICUs. My wife eventually got in touch with an incredible pulmonologist who had previous success with a couple of other patients and wanted to take my case. I was airlifted to her hospital and kept stable on the ventilator for another week, totaling 5.5 weeks on the vent. I was transitioned to ECMO, one of the highest forms of life support, to stabilize me and prepare me for a hopeful lung transplant. After a few days, the social worker evaluated me through family interviews and got me scored and listed with UNOS. 2 days later, a matching set of lungs became available. My wife got the call from the surgeon that he was going to perform the transplant through the night, as it would take around 10 hours to complete. A couple of days later, I was awakened from my 6.5-week coma with the words, "Mr. Morris, we're the lung transplant team. Congratulations, you got new lungs." I didn't know where I was, why I got new lungs, or why I physically couldn't move due to coma atrophy. But that's a longer version of my story. Almost 2.5 years later, you'd never know I went through any of this unless I told you. My life is forever changed, but my wife and I are still here to tell the story. Nice try, virus, in 2020. I'm not gone yet. The journey continues. Story 16. So I didn't almost pass away in the story, but my dad certainly thought I did, and he couldn't stop laughing to see if I was okay. We had a really steep downhill backyard. One day, my brother and my dad were riding in an old-school scooter down with it, one with those big rubber wheels. Well, I came outside and thought, that looks fun, let me take a turn. Now I'm the person Murphy's Law seems to follow. I found the one divot on the way down, and I fell face first to the ground, ending up with dirt all in my mouth. I was kind of choking on myself while lying there. After a few minutes, I got up, spitting out grass, and I must add, in tears. My dad looked at me and said, "Thank God you're alive. I thought you passed away. I just couldn't stop laughing to see if you were okay." Story 17. I live with and take care of my elderly mom in a 55-plus neighborhood. For the sake of both our health, we walk every day. One day, an older lady in the neighborhood had a panic attack and decided the best way to deal with it was to get in the car and drive to her daughter's place to have her talk her through it. Ended up running up on the sidewalk, the very sidewalk me and my mom walked down. We happened to get hung up at the house for a couple of minutes, and so saw the whole thing instead of being in the way of it. Story 18. I didn't nearly pass away. I actually did. I was quite a sick baby, and my mom often took me to the doctor for various reasons. So often, in fact, that the clinic nurse became quite rude to her when she'd make an appointment. One day, I was having trouble breathing, so, of course, Mom rushed to the doctor. As soon as the nurse saw her, she loudly exclaimed, "Mrs. X, you don't even have an appointment. The doctor's too busy for you today." Fortunately, other patients noticed I was turning blue and demanded the nurse take us through. I had stopped breathing by the time the doctor saw us and was resuscitated. We were in a small regional town and had no ambulance, so the local police had to rush us to the children's hospital. I passed away shortly after arriving and was revived. It turned out I was born with a condition in my heart. Wow, that nurse should have been fired. Story 19. When I was a kid, my dad used to lead groups of college kids to Central and South America to build houses. One year, he decided that we should ride the chicken bus from Guatemala City to Mexico City, long trip. We got to the border, and a soldier with a hell of a big gun got on the bus and looked around, saw that we had about 15 college girls on the bus, and then went and talked to someone on the phone. About 2 minutes later, a bunch of guys with huge guns got on the bus and informed us that all the males had to get off the bus and line up in front of it. I remember that we did it. We just stood there alongside the bus while guys with big guns kept an eye on us. Soldiers crammed into the bus. We waited for what seemed like an hour. Finally, they got off the bus and we got back on and away we went. I remember my dad, the leader of the group, looking very pale and sweating bullets. It was one of those situations where it was easy to see that it could have gone very, very wrong. Story 20. I used to work in HVAC and refrigeration. One day, while finishing up a job, I was making my descent down a ladder, and then what felt like a blink of an eye, I was being woken up by paramedics speaking loudly to me. I guess I had fallen 25 feet from a fixed ladder and was knocked unconscious. I had numerous injuries. When I was in the ICU, a nurse kept telling me it's crazy how I was able to regain consciousness and that I'm lucky to not be paralyzed. Story 21. Back in May 2019, my husband, at the time, who was cheating, came up with a plan with his girlfriend in which he would claim he lost a month's supply of his HBP pills and therefore get an additional 30. He then crushed them up and out, then into a breakfast that he made for me. I ate the breakfast and about 45 minutes later felt very faint and called 911. I spent a week in ICU and another week in CCU before being discharged. I was delirious during the ICU time because I was not getting enough red liquid to my brain. It was the worst experience of my life. I filed for divorce immediately after being discharged. He was also banned from entering the hospital while I was there. Well, geez, I hope he got more than just a ban from a hospital for doing what he did. Story 22. It was my 16th birthday. I'd been going through a difficult time and had contemplated ending my life at that age. As soon as it hit midnight, I was preparing to do so. Exactly at 12:01 a.m., my phone rang. It was my grandpa. He had stayed up to wish me a happy birthday. He felt bad he was a minute late, and I remember sitting down in my closet and talking to him. He told me he was going to take me out for pancakes later and to be ready. He made me promise I wouldn't be late. Then he told me he loved me, and we hung up. After we hung up, I was tired, so I went to bed and slept. I woke up, showered, brushed my teeth, and met my grandpa at IHOP for breakfast, just as I promised him. He then told me we were going to hang out every day that week, which we did. I don't know if he saved my life, but during that week, he showed me the beauty in life again. He passed away a bit ago, but he always loved life, and I aspire to be like him. And if that story got to you as it did to me, and you're enjoying the video, please remember to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 23. I spent 9 years as a bouncer during and after college. One night, a guy was getting aggressive with a woman in the club, and I went to tell him to calm down. He got a little aggressive with me, and I ended up restraining him. I was escorting him to the exit, repeatedly telling him that if he'd calm down, I'd release him, but that just seemed to anger him more. I ended up fully subduing him and taking him outside. I told the police outside what happened, then went back to my post. As the night ended and I was escorting a crowd of people out the door, one of my coworkers outside put a hand on my chest and pushed me back in, saying it wasn't safe. It turned out the guy I'd removed didn't appreciate the experience very much and was waiting in a car in front of the club. Luckily, just before I came outside, police recognized him sitting there and asked him to step out of the vehicle. When he did, a pistol he was sitting on fell out of the car and he was arrested. If I'd walked out a minute earlier, I would have been in grave danger. Story 24. In 2018, my dad had gotten new tires and rims on his '68 Mustang, and I wanted to drive it home from the tire place. He allowed me to drive it with him following in his truck. All was well until we were a few miles down the highway. The front driver's side tire exploded. It had been faulty. While I was going 65 miles per hour, I hit the back of my dad's truck, spun out into the middle lane, got hit from the side by someone in the middle lane, and the car flipped 6 times, causing 3 separate accidents. I ended up against a concrete barrier on the left side of the road. I sustained a lot of injuries. I also experienced short-term memory loss for 4 months, and I stayed in the hospital for 3 of those months. The first 3 weeks, I was on life support. I'm so grateful that my dad was not the one driving the car, as I would have likely lost him, and that would have been worse than any injury I received. Story 25. In January, I had a tooth removed. The dentist gave me a prescription for amoxicillin to ward off any potential infection. I'm allergic to penicillin, but I've taken amoxicillin many times over the last 20 years. I took a dose on Monday. By Wednesday, I had a small rash on my arm. It felt like a rash from rolling on freshly cut grass, which I had done. It stayed until Sunday, when it worsened. I went to urgent care and they told me to take some over-the-counter medicine for the symptoms. On Monday, it was even worse. I woke up and my chest and back were bright red like a severe sunburn. I also felt incredibly tired. I drove to my doctor, who took some samples, gave me some medicine, and was very concerned. He told me if I got worse, I should go to the ER immediately and that I was to check in with him daily. I felt much better after the medicine. I woke up Tuesday morning and could tell my breathing was different. My heart rate, normally 60 BPM, was at 120 BPM after waking up. My hands, my arms, and my legs were completely swollen. My wife got home a few minutes after I woke up and said my face was totally swollen. So we hopped into the car and drove to the nearest ER. The nurse brought me back, and within seconds, I had 3 or 4 nurses around me plus 2 doctors. 7 hours later, the decision was made to transfer me to an ICU at a different hospital. Part of the long wait was trying to figure out what was wrong and whether I needed to go to an ICU or a burn unit via helicopter. After a 20-minute ambulance ride to hospital number 2, I was surrounded by 4 ER doctors. They spent a few hours trying to figure it out. A dermatologist finally arrived and within 45 minutes determined I had Stevens-Johnson syndrome. After another 48 hours of ICU care plus 24 hours of recovery, I was home. Luckily, all is well and no more medications from the penicillin family for me. What? That is crazy. I, myself, your guy Rufus, is allergic to amoxicillin. So, definitely Googling Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Watch out. Story 26. Before I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 11, I'm 31 now, I experienced the developmental symptoms, extreme thirst and urination, stomach pains, headaches, and significant weight loss, to name a few. Since my body couldn't break down glucose anymore, ketones, essentially an acid, formed to try and compensate. The ketones consumed all my body fat and were on their way to affecting the other parts. I was terrified of the doctor and kept fighting it, begging not to go. After months of being extremely sick while still going to school, my parents got one of those over-the-counter tests. My test strip turned black, indicating a severe result. I immediately went to the Children's Hospital for extensive work and to be diagnosed. I didn't even know what diabetes was, and I had an extreme fear, probably a phobia, of needles. The medical professionals told me, again, I was only 11, that I was basically in critical condition, and if I had waited 24 to 48 hours longer, I would have needed an oxygen tent or been in a coma. I weighed only 69 pounds at the time of my diagnosis. I'm pretty healthy now and have a continuous glucose monitor that has changed my life. I overcame my needle phobia, and I am now a tattoo artist. I used to be a piercer too. Well, that was a good turn of events, huh? Story 27. During my high school driving class, there was a teacher, myself, and another student. The other student was driving, and they stopped on the train tracks just as the train was approaching. We could see the conductor pulling the horn. I was screaming from the back for her to go, but the teacher was yelling at me to be quiet. I started kicking the back seat. It was only a 2-door car, or I would have jumped out. Finally, she decided to move, and as we got off the tracks, the cars were passing us. We very nearly didn't make it that day. I screamed all the way back to school. The teacher turned pale and looked as though he was about to be sick. He still allowed her to drive us back. He canceled the rest of the day and quit teaching driving right then and there. To this day, when I get to train tracks, I always stop and look both ways. I get anxious at train tracks, and my significant other knows this and will stop for me if they're driving. That person never got their license and moved into town walking everywhere instead. Story 28. About 5 years ago, my kids were on the driveway bouncing a ball, trying to see how high they could get it. I needed to run to the store, so I walked past them going to my car. They asked me to bounce the ball as high as I could. I thought, I'll drop kick, punt the ball as high as I can because it will go way higher than if I just bounce it off the ground. I was wearing some old running shoes with not much grip, and our driveway was a little wet from earlier rain. I took a big step with my left foot, dropped the ball, and swung my right foot as hard as I could to kick it. My left foot slid out from under me, and I slammed my back instantaneously on the ground as hard as I possibly could have. The back of my head was maybe half an inch from the ground. I don't know if I would have passed away if my head had hit the ground, but I've heard of people passing away just from falling, let alone slamming down hard. It would have been a horrifying experience for my young kids. Story 29. I'm not certain about almost, but it was certainly a scary experience. I have the dosage of my anti-anxiety medication for a couple of months during one of the busiest times at my job, and for the first time in my life, I became genuinely depressed. I live on the 7th floor, and it started to feel like it would have been the easiest thing to just remove the window frame and fall. A number of things kept me from doing it, but number one on that list was the realization that the fall was not high enough to guarantee doom. Most likely, I would be severely, life-alteringly injured or left in a vegetative state. Then I thought about what it would do to my family, my friends, and even my coworkers. I like my team at work a lot. But ultimately, the fear of the pain of hitting the ground and injuring myself is what kept me here. Story 30. I have a story about my friend and me that I've never told anyone. Where we camp, there's a log you can cross to get to an island, and then you can cross a narrow river to reach a whole different, amazing area, even better than the little island. One day, we decided to cross the river to that other part of the land. The river was challenging to cross, but we made it. We started walking, and I saw something. It was like a scene from a movie, a bear that had just finished eating something, perhaps a deer. It was a brown bear, and my heart sank. This animal looked formidable. We made eye contact for about 10 seconds before I quietly said, "We need to go." She replied, "Why? We just got over here." "We need to leave. Just get back in the water and start crossing. I'll be behind you," I urged. "Why won't you tell me?" she asked. "I need to use the restroom, okay?" I improvised. "Oh, lol. All right, I need to pee as well," she said. "Hurry, it takes a bit to go back, and I also think I forgot my pills," I added, trying to create urgency. "Oh, all right," she said, grabbing her walking stick she had made and starting to cross. I was so surprised the bear hadn't done anything yet. It just sat there near the carcass. I looked back, and the bear was now closer, seemingly looking for us. "It's getting late, and I need to take my pills. We need to hurry," I pressed. "All right, we'll take the short way," she said. We were crossing the log, and I hear a growl. My heart sank again. "Holy crap, there's a bear. Cool," she exclaimed. "Yeah, it's not on the island. We would know," I replied, trying to sound calm. We rushed back, and I went to the bathroom, sitting there thinking, what if I hadn't seen it? She wouldn't have seen it. She didn't have her glasses. What if it had charged us? Could that have happened? I dreamt about it that night, about what would have happened if we had been in those woods for much longer. It was our last day there, and of course, we didn't go back over there for the rest of the day. We left the next day, and I still have a recurring dream about that bear. I'd never seen one in person before. It was terrifying. It was only about 100 feet away, not terribly far for a bear. Story 31. When I was 7, I spent an entire day swimming in shallow, clear water at the beach with goggles. My back and part of my head were often out of the water. I didn't feel thirsty since I wasn't sweating, and the water kept me cool. After many hours at the beach, we came home in the evening. I felt groggy, but otherwise fine. When I went to sleep, I had a vivid dream where I was a soldier in a war zone, and I experienced a sudden, intense sensation in my head. I woke up to my mom shaking me awake, saying we were going to the hospital. I showed no outward symptoms, but my mother's intuition was strong. At the hospital, they couldn't take a sample. The needle just came out nearly black. I was diagnosed with sunstroke and was so dehydrated my red liquid was too thick to be drawn. They told me that even an hour later would have put my life at significant risk, and I was almost certainly facing a grim outcome by the next day's lunch. I spent 2 nights being monitored and on an IV drip. Afterward, my skin developed boils over a few weeks. I had to apply a special ointment to protect my face and neck from UV light and weathering due to the fragility of my new skin. Story 32. I was 9 years old and didn't know how to swim. 3 of my brothers and I took one of those inflatable pool mats out to the middle of a lake where there was a floating dock. While everyone else was swimming around, I lost my grip on the pool mat and sank. There were a lot of kids and people splashing, so no one noticed me struggling and sinking. I distinctly remember at one point looking down and seeing myself at the bottom, and then watching my brother grab me and pull me all the way up and onto the dock where someone performed resuscitation. I remember going from being terrified to feeling so calm and at peace. Then suddenly, I felt myself being pulled back, experiencing pain and chaos as people were shouting and crying. I remember we rode our bikes home so fast we didn't wait for an ambulance, as that would have meant consequences from our dad. We got home, showered, and sat in front of the TV, acting like nothing happened. The evening news came on, and on the main story was about a child who had drowned at the same lake. Someone ended up drowning right after we left. Story 33. Surfing with some friends while traveling in Australia. I was pretty inexperienced, but thought I could handle things, which I couldn't. We went to a remote part of a national park to surf a great spot. My friends had been surfing since birth, but they took me out in what, in their defense, was some pretty normal swell, maybe a couple of meters at most, and I could avoid the waves I didn't feel comfortable with. We paddled too far out to get beyond the break of a larger set that rolled in out of nowhere, and we realized that marked a change in the conditions. To make a long story short, I got pinned to the seafloor, and my board was pulled so forcefully and for so long that the leg rope snapped. I was rolled around and didn't know which way was up. I accidentally found my way to the surface, absolutely exhausted and having just swallowed rather than inhaled seawater because I was so desperate for air. I nearly didn't make it because I had nothing left and could barely move my arms and legs. Fortunately, a bodyboarder nearby saw the dire straits I was in and paddled over between sets. They pulled me out and paddled me back to shore. I retched seawater and then passed out. A new respect for the sea was unlocked that day. Story 34. I was on a 30-hour road trip with my dad halfway across the United States, driving from Wisconsin to California. There were no real rest stops aside from a quick bathroom break and grabbing food. It was probably around midnight. We were passing through Colorado, I think, and I was already fast asleep in the passenger seat. My dad started to doze off behind the wheel, and we were in a very dangerous situation. What saved us? My dad said he felt a jab on his arm that startled him awake just before we would have gone over a cliff. I was woken up by his frantic driving to correct himself and started panicking once I realized what had almost just happened. He asked me if I was the one to wake him up, but I wasn't. I like to think there was an angel looking out for us that night. It makes me feel like maybe I still have a purpose in life if it wasn't my time to go yet. Story 35. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I was experiencing stomach issues for a while. My doctor said it was some kind of flu and should resolve soon. After about 8 weeks and a few doctor's appointments, I was lying on a mattress on the floor in the living room watching the first Narnia movie. It was around 10:30 p.m. when my body started to shake uncontrollably, and it wasn't long before I started foaming at the mouth. Since my parents didn't have a car or even a driver's license, one of them went to get my neighbor to ask if he could take us to the hospital. In the emergency room, some students and a nurse asked us a few questions about school and my home situation, as they thought my stomach issues might be related to stress or some unspoken problem. I remember thinking those were silly questions. How would this help me? When the doctor arrived and did some examinations, we were told I needed to have an enema. It turned out I had severe constipation to the point where my stomach and intestines were under extreme pressure. It was the biggest poop I'd ever pooped. Story 36. When I was young, I really liked bread, and my twin and I, we were 3 at the time, needed to get ready to pick up my sister from school. My mom told us we weren't allowed to have any more bread and honey. I decided to defy that and climb onto the counter to get some bread that she had put up there. I panicked, not wanting to get in trouble, so I ate the whole thing in one bite. I tried to swallow, and it didn't work. I ran to my mom, who was in the bathroom, having just gotten out of the shower. I looked in the mirror, saw my face was blue, looked at my mom in her robe and a green face mask, and then everything went black. Apparently, they had to resuscitate me as my heart stopped and I wasn't breathing. Surprisingly, a firefighter was right down the road and he came in and saved me. Ever since, I've been scared of needles because they gave me an IV, but I will never be scared of bread. Story 37. 2 years ago, I went on a few dates with a girl and things ended amicably. A few months later, I started receiving threatening messages from her ex-boyfriend indicating he intended to harm me and that I would never be safe. I went to the police and months went by without further contact from him. About 6 months later, I was riding my bike when a car hit me from behind. I fell and instantly recognized it was him. While I was on the ground, he attempted to run me over with his car at full speed, but I managed to get up and move out of his way. He got out of his car and shouted menacingly. I started running, but he caught up to me and harmed me. I managed to break free and escape with minor injuries. The guy fled in his car but was later caught by the police. He spent a month in jail but has been free ever since. He was sentenced but is still awaiting his full punishment. The reason for his extreme behavior was reportedly due to substance misuse. Story 38. I lost control of my car while entering the highway during a snowstorm. Semis were in the far right lane and weren't moving over to let me in. I sped up a bit faster and merged in front of one of these semis to avoid hitting the guardrail that was quickly approaching at the entrance. I quickly merged into the passing lane and accelerated to pass the next couple of semis. As I did that, my tires lost traction and my car started fishtailing left and right. I was only a few feet away from going under the trailer between the 2 sets of wheels on the driver's side. I somehow managed to countersteer the fishtailing and regain control, quickly slowing down after that. Story 39. I work in the film industry as an LX boom lift operator, which involves a lot of metal equipment and large metal lights. After we wrapped up one night, I had to move my lift across to the other side of the house on the main road. My best boy, the supervisor, helped me pack up and escorted my lift as a spotter while I drove it back. It was pitch black darkness, my lights were off, and there were no lights on the tiny farm road. All I had was my headlamp. When driving boom lifts, it's faster and offers a more commanding view to drive with the boom all the way down and the jib if your unit has a moving one, which mine did, all the way up. This gives you a better view and overrides the slow function as the lift boom is already down, making it safe. My spotter completely missed a power line that my metal lights and I would have hit if I hadn't had this uncanny sixth sense to look up. About 5 feet away from hitting the line, I suddenly realized, holy cow, power line, and quickly boomed down. I completely forgot it was there, yet I just had a sixth sense not to hit it at the last second. Now my tires were rubber, but my lift and lights were all metal. What would have happened if I hit that power line? Probably a very serious situation. This was in November 2019. I would have missed all of the 2020 chaos. Still alive. Story 40. When I was 13, some friends and I went to McDonald's and were having a good time until I looked at a guy sitting in a large group. The guy then looked at me while talking to his friends and somehow convinced me to go outside with them. So there I was, a little 13-year-old kid surrounded by 10 to 13 guys who were intimidating me. Luckily, a guy I knew who was a little older came over and convinced them that he needed to talk to me. They allowed him to because he was somewhat well known in the area. Anyway, he got me around the street corner and told me to run, and I ran all the way back home, 5 kilometers, and I never saw those guys again. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.